As the car stopped at the front door, Cuneo said, "I will be waiting for you, if you need me." "Thank you." The door was opened by a butler. "Good morning. Come in, please. The senator is expecting you." The two women entered. The living room was elegant yet casual, furnished with an eclectic assortment of antiques and comfortable-looking couches and chairs. On the wall, above a large fireplace with a Baroque mantel, were mirrored candle sconces. The butler said, "This way, please." Kelly and Diane followed the butler into a large drawing room. Senator Van Leuven was waiting for them. She was wearing a light blue silk suit and blouse, and her hair was hanging loosely. She was more feminine looking than Diane had expected. "I'm Pauline Van Leuven." "Diane Stevens." "Kelly Harris." "I'm glad to see you both. It's taken much too long." Kelly looked at Senator Van Leuven, puzzled. "I'm sorry." Tanner Kingsley's voice behind them said, "She means you have been very lucky, but your luck has just run out." Diane and Kelly turned. Tanner Kingsley and Harry Flint had come into the room. Tanner said, "Now, Mr. Flint." Harry Flint raised a pistol. Without a word, he aimed at the women and fired twice. Pauline Van Leuven and Tanner Kingsley watched as Kelly's and Diane's bodies tumbled backward and fell to the floor. Tanner walked over to Senator Van Leuven and hugged her. "It's finally over, Princess." Chapter 42. Flint asked, "What do you want me to do with the bodies?" Tanner did not hesitate. "Tie some weights around their ankles, have them flown out about 200 miles, and drop them into the Atlantic." "No problem." Flint left the room. Tanner turned to Senator Van Leuven. "That ends it, Princess. We can be on our way." She moved up to him and kissed him. "I've missed you so much, baby." "I've missed you, too. Those monthly rendezvous were frustrating because I knew you had to leave." Tanner held her close. "From now on, we're together. We'll wait a respectable 3 or 4 months as an homage to your dear departed husband, and then we'll get married." She smiled and said, "Let's make it a month." He nodded. "Sounds good. I resigned from the Senate yesterday. They were very understanding about my grief over my husband's death." "Wonderful. Now we can be seen together freely. I want you to see something at KIG that I couldn't show you before." Tanner and Pauline had reached the red brick building. Tanner walked up to the solid steel door. There was a recess in the center of it. He was wearing a heavy cameo ring with the face of a Greek warrior on it. Pauline watched as Tanner pressed the ring hard into the recess, and the door began to open. The room was enormous, filled with huge computers and television screens. At a far wall were generators and electronics, all linked together with a control panel in the center. Tanner said, "Princess, meet Prima. This is Ground Zero. What you and I have here is something that's going to change lives forever. This room is the command center of a satellite system that can control the weather in any area of the world. We can cause storms anywhere. We can create famines by stopping rain. We can fog in airports. We can manufacture hurricanes and cyclones that would stop the world's economy." He smiled. I've already demonstrated some of our power. A lot of countries have been working on weather control, but none of them has solved it yet. Tanner pressed a button, and a large television screen lit up. What you're seeing here is a technical advance that the Army wishes it had. He turned to Pauline and smiled. The only wild card that prevented Prima from giving me perfect control was the greenhouse effect, and you took care of that beautifully. He sighed. Do you know who created this project? Andrew. He really was a genius. Pauline was staring at the massive equipment. I don't understand how this can control the weather. Well, the simple version is that warm air rises toward colder air, and if there is moisture in, don't patronize me, darling. Sorry, but the longer version is a bit complicated, Tanner said. I'm listening. It's a little technical, so bear with me. Microwave lasers, created with the nanotechnology my brother produced, when fired into Earth's atmosphere, make free-forming oxygen that bonds with hydrogen, thus producing ozone and water. Free oxygen in the atmosphere pairs up, that's why it's called O2, and my brother discovered that firing that laser from space into the atmosphere made the oxygen bond with two hydrogen atoms into ozone O, and water H2O. I still don't understand how that would. The weather is driven by water. Andrew found in larger scale tests that so much water was created as a byproduct of his experiments that winds shifted. More lasers, more wind. Control the water and the wind, and you control all weather. He was thoughtful for a moment. When I found out that Akira Iso in Tokyo, and later, Madeline Smith in Zurich, were close to solving the problem, I offered them jobs here, so I could control them. But they turned me down. I couldn't afford to let them finish what they were working on. He sighed. I told you that I had 4 of my top meteorologists working on the project with me. Yes. They were good, too. Franz Verbrugge in Berlin, Mark Harris in Paris, Gary Reynolds in Vancouver, and Richard Stevens in New York. I had each of them trying to solve a different facet of weather control, and I thought that because they were working in different countries, they would never put the pieces together and find out what the ultimate purpose of the project was. But somehow they did. They came to see me in Vienna, to ask me what plans I had for Prima. I told them I was going to give it to our government. I didn't think they would pursue the matter any further, but just to be safe, I set a trap. When they were sitting in the reception room, I put in a call to your Senate office, making sure they could hear me denying to you that I had ever heard of Prima. The next morning, they began calling you for appointments. That's when I knew they had to be disposed of. Tanner smiled. Let me show you what we have here. On a computer screen, a map of the world appeared, dotted with lines and symbols. As Tanner spoke, he moved the switch, and the focus of the map kept shifting until it highlighted Portugal. Tanner said, the agricultural valleys in Portugal are supplied by rivers that flow to the Atlantic from Spain. Just imagine what would happen to Portugal if it continued to rain until the agricultural valley was drowned out. Tanner pressed a button, and on a huge screen appeared a picture of a massive pink palace with ceremonial guards standing watch while its lush, beautiful gardens glimmered in the bright sunlight. That's the presidential palace. The picture switched to a dining room inside, where a family was having breakfast. That's the president of Portugal and his wife and 2 children. When they speak, it's going to be in Portuguese, but you'll hear it in English. I have dozens of nano cameras and microphones set up in the palace. The president doesn't know it, but his head security guard works for me. An aide was saying to the president, at 11 o'clock this morning, you have a meeting at the embassy, followed by a labor union speech. At 1 p.m., luncheon at the museum. This evening, we're having a state reception. For the phone rang at the breakfast table. The president picked it up. Hello. Then Tanner's voice, instantaneously translated from English to Portuguese as he spoke, said, Mr. President. The president looked startled. Who is this? He asked as his voice was immediately translated from Portuguese to English for Tanner. I'm a friend. Who? How did you get my private number? That's not important. I want you to listen very carefully. I love your country, and I would not want to see it destroyed. If you don't want terrible storms to wipe it off the map, you must send me $2 billion in gold. If you're not interested now, I'll call you back in 3 days. On the screen, they watched the president slam the phone down. He said to his wife, some crazy man got my phone number. Sounds like he escaped from an asylum. Tanner turned to Pauline. That was recorded 3 days ago. Now let me show you the conversation we had yesterday. A picture of the massive pink palace and its beautiful gardens flashed on again, but this time heavy rains were pouring down, and the sky was ablaze with thunder and lightning. Tanner pressed a button, and the scene on television moved into the president's office. He was seated at a conference table, with half a dozen assistants all talking at once. The president's face was grim. The telephone on his desk rang. Now. Tanner grinned. The president picked up the telephone apprehensively. Hello. Good morning, Mr. President. How? You are destroying my country. You have ruined the crops. The fields are flooded. The villages are being. He stopped and took a deep breath. How long is this going to go on? There was hysteria in the president's voice. Until I receive the $2 billion. They watched the president grit his teeth and close his eyes for a moment. And you will stop the storms, then? Yes. How do you want the money delivered? You see how easy it is, princess. We already have the money. Let me show you what else Prima can do. These are our earlier tests. Tanner pressed another button and a picture of a raging hurricane appeared on the screen. This is taking place in Japan, Tanner said. Real time. And this season for them is always calm weather. He pressed a different button and pictures of a violent hailstorm appeared, battering a grove of citrus fruit. This is Liv from Florida. The temperature there now is near 0 in June. The crops are being wiped out. He activated another button, and on the giant screen was a scene of a tornado tearing down buildings. This is what's happening in Brazil. As you see, Tanner said proudly, Prima can do anything. Pauline moved closer to him and said softly, like it's Papa. Tanner turned off the television set. He picked up 3 DVDs and showed them to her. These are three interesting conversations that I had with Peru, Mexico, and Italy. Do you know how the gold is delivered? We send trucks to their banks and they fill them. And then there's catch-22. If they make any attempt to find out where the gold is going, I promise them that the storm will begin again and never stop. Pauline looked at him, worried. Tanner, is there any way they can trace your calls? Tanner laughed. I hope they do. If someone tries to trace them, they'll reach a relay in a church, then a second relay takes them to a school. The third relay will set up storms they'll wish they had never seen. And the fourth time it ends up at the Oval Office of the White House. Pauline laughed. The door opened and Andrew walked in. Tanner turned. Ah! Here's my dear brother. Andrew was staring at Pauline, a puzzled expression on his face. Don't I know you? He looked at her for almost a minute as he concentrated, and then his face lit up. You and Tanner were going to get married. I was the best man. Yuri princess. Pauline said, very good, Andrew. But you went away. You didn't love Tanner. Tanner spoke up. Let me straighten you out. She went away because she did love me. He took Pauline's hand. She telephoned me the day after her wedding. She married a very rich, influential man so she could use her husband's influence to get important clients for KIG. That's why we were able to grow so fast. Tanner gave Pauline a hug. We arranged to meet secretly every month. He said proudly, and then she got interested in politics and became a senator. Andrew frowned. But Sebastiana Cortez. Tanner laughed. She was a decoy, to throw people off the track. I made sure that everyone at the office knew about her. Princess and I couldn't afford to let anyone become suspicious. Andrew said vaguely, oh, I see. Come over here, Andrew. Tanner led him to the control center. They stood in front of Prima. Tanner said, do you remember this? You helped develop it? Now it's finished. Andrew's eyes widened. Prima? Tanner pointed to a button and said, yes. Weather control. He pointed to another button. Location. He looked at his brother. See how simple we made it? Andrew said, under his breath, I remember. Tanner turned to Pauline. This is only the beginning, princess. Tanner took her in his arms. I'm researching 30 more countries. You got what you wanted. Power and money. Pauline said happily, a computer like that could be worth 2 computers like that, Tanner said. I have a surprise for you. Have you ever heard of Samoa Island, in the South Pacific? No. We just bought it. It's 60 square miles and unbelievably beautiful. It's in the French Polynesian Islands, and it has a landing strip and a yacht harbor. It has everything, including he paused dramatically Prima too. Pauline said, you mean there's another? Tanner nodded. That's right. It's underground, where no one can ever find it. Now that those 2 nosy bitches are finally out of the way, the world is ours. Chapter 43. Kelly was the first to open her eyes. She was lying on her back, naked, on the bare floor of a concrete basement, her hands handcuffed to 8-inch chains fastened to the wall, just above the floor. There was a small, barred window at the far end of the room, and a heavy door leading into the room. Kelly turned to see Diane next to her, also naked and handcuffed. Their clothing had been thrown into a corner. Diane said groggily, "Where are we?" "We're in hell, partner." Kelly tested the handcuffs. They were tight and firm around her wrists. She could lift her arm 4 or 5 inches, but that was it. "We walked right into their trap," she said bitterly. "You know what I hate most about this?" Kelly looked around the bare room and said, "I can't imagine." "They won. We know why they killed our husbands, and why they're going to kill us, but there's no way we can ever tell the world. They've gotten away with it." Kingsley was right. Our luck has finally run out. No, it hasn't. The door had opened, and Harry Flint was standing in the room. His smile widened. He locked the door behind him and put the key in his pocket. "I shot you with xylocaine bullets. I was supposed to kill you, but I thought we'd all have a little fun first." He moved closer. The two women exchanged a terrified look. They watched Flint, grinning, take off his shirt and trousers. "Look what I have for you," he said. He dropped his shorts. His member was stiff and turgid. Flint looked at the two of them and moved toward Diane. "Why don't I start with you, baby?" And then Kelly interrupted. "Wait a minute, handsome. How about taking me first? I feel horny." Diane looked at her, stunned. Kelly Flint turned to Kelly and smirked. "Sure, baby. You're going to love this." Flint reached down and started to stretch out on top of Kelly's naked body. "Oh, yes." Kelly moaned. "I've really missed this." Diane had closed her eyes. She could not bear to watch. Kelly stretched her legs apart, and as Flint started to enter her, Kelly raised her right arm a few inches and reached into her upswept hairdo. When her hand came down, there was a rat-tailed comb with a steel tip 5 inches long in it. In one quick motion, she slammed the steel tail into the back of Harry Flint's neck, pushing its steel tip all the way through. Flint tried to scream, but all that came out was a loud gurgle. Blood was pouring out of his neck. Diane opened her eyes, stunned. Kelly looked over at Diane. You can relax now." She pushed away the limp figure on top of her. "He's dead." Diane's heart was beating so fast it felt as though it was going to leap from her chest. Her face was ghostly white. Kelly was watching her, alarmed. "Are you all right?" "I was afraid he was going to." Her mouth went dry. She looked at the bloody body of Harry Flint and shuddered. "Why didn't you tell me about?" She pointed to the rat-tailed comb in his neck. "Because if it hadn't worked, well, I didn't want you to think I failed you. Let's get out of here." "How?" "I'll show you." Kelly stretched out a long leg to where Flint had dropped his pants. Her toes reached out to grab his trousers. 2 inches too far away. She shifted closer. 1 inch too short. Then finally, success. Kelly grinned. "Voila! Her toes clutched the leg of the trousers, and she slowly pulled them close until they were near enough to grab with her hands. She was going through his pockets, looking for the key to the handcuffs. She found it. A moment later, her hands were free. She hurried to free Diane. "My God, you're a miracle," Diane said. "Thank my new hairdo. Let's get away from here." The two women picked up their clothes from the floor and quickly dressed. Kelly took the key to the door from Flint's pocket. They walked over to the door and listened a moment. Silence. Kelly opened the door. They were in a long, empty corridor. "There must be a back way out of here," Diane said. Kelly nodded. "All right. You go that way and I'll go the other way, and no. Please. Let's stay together, Kelly." Kelly squeezed Diane's arm and nodded. "Right, partner." Minutes later, the two women found themselves in a garage. There was a Jaguar and a Toyota in it. "Take your choice," Kelly said. "The Jaguar is too noticeable. Let's take the Toyota." "I hope the key is it was." Diane took the wheel. "Do you have any idea where we're going?" Kelly asked. "To Manhattan." "I don't have a plan yet." "That's good news." Kelly sighed. "We need to find a place to sleep. When Kingsley finds out we've escaped, he's going to go crazy. We're not going to be safe anywhere." Kelly was thinking. "Yes, we are." Diane glanced at her. "What do you mean?" Kelly said proudly, "I have a plan." Chapter 44. They drove into White Plains, 25 miles north of Manhattan. Diane said, "This looks like a nice town." "What are we doing here?" "I have a friend here. She'll take care of us." "Tell me about her." Kelly said slowly, "My mother was married to a drunk who enjoyed beating her. When I was able to afford to take care of my mother, I persuaded her to leave him. One of the models who had run away from an abusive boyfriend told me about this place. It's a boarding house run by an angel of a woman named Grace Seidel. I took my mother there to stay until I could find an apartment for her. I used to visit her at Grace's every day. My mother loved it and became friends with some of the boarders. I finally found an apartment for Mother and went to pick her up." She stopped. Diane looked at her. "What happened?" She had gone back to her husband. They had reached the boarding house. "We're here." Grace Seidel was in her 50s, a dynamic, motherly ball of energy. When she opened the door and saw Kelly, her face lit up. "Kelly." She threw her arms around her. "I'm so glad to see you." Kelly said, "This is my friend Diane." They exchanged hellos. "Your room is all ready for you," Grace said. "As a matter of fact, it was your mother's room. I had an extra bed put in." As Grace Seidel walked them to their bedroom, they passed through a comfortable-looking living room where a dozen women were playing card games or doing various other activities. "How long will you be staying?" Grace asked. Kelly and Diane looked at each other. "We're not sure." Grace Seidel smiled. "No problem. The room is yours for as long as you want it." The room was lovely, neat and clean. When Grace Seidel had left, Kelly said to Diane, "We'll be safe here. And by the way, I think we made the Guinness Book of World Records. Do you know how many times they've tried to kill us?" "Yes." Diane was standing by the window. Kelly heard her say, "Thank you, Richard." Kelly started to speak, then thought, "It's no use." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Andrew, dozing at his desk, dreamed that he was asleep in a hospital bed. It was the voices in the room that had awakened him. And luckily, I discovered this when we were decontaminating Andrew's safety equipment. I thought I should show it to you right away. The goddamn army told me it would be safe. A man was handing Tanner one of the gas masks from the army experiment. I found a tiny hole at the base of the mask. It looks like someone cut it. That would be enough to cause your brother's condition. Tanner looked at the mask and thundered, "Whoever is responsible for this is going to pay." He looked at the man and said, "I'll look into this immediately. Thanks for bringing it to me." From his bed, Andrew groggily watched the man leave. Tanner looked at the mask a moment and then walked over to a corner of the room where there was a large hospital cart filled with soiled linens. Tanner reached down into the bottom of the cart and buried the gas mask under the linens. Andrew tried to ask his brother what was happening, but he was too tired. He fell asleep. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Tanner, Andrew, and Pauline had returned to Tanner's office. Tanner had asked his secretary to bring in the morning newspapers. Tanner skimmed through the front pages. "Look at these. Scientists are baffled by freak storms in Guatemala, Peru, Mexico, and Italy." He looked at Pauline exultantly. "And this is only the beginning. They're going to have a lot more to be baffled about." Vince Carballo came running into the room. "Mr. Kingsley, I'm busy." "What is it?" "I want you to take a dozen men and go to White Plains. Check every hotel, boarding house, and flop house, any place where they could be hiding. I'm giving a $5 million reward to anyone who turns them in. Move it?" "Yes, sir." Vince Carballo hurried out the door. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In their room at Grace Seidel's boarding house, Diane said, "I'm sorry about what happened when you got to Paris. Did they kill the concierge?" "I don't know. They just disappeared." "What about your dog, Angel?" Kelly said tightly, "I don't want to talk about it." "I'm sorry. Do you know what's frustrating? We were so close. Now that we know what happened, there's no one we can tell it to. It would be our word against KIG's. They would put us in an asylum." Kelly nodded. "You're right. There is no one left to go to." There was a momentary silence and Diane said slowly, "I think there is."